In 2015, nearly 200 nations promised to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The threshold scientists warn we cannot cross without devastating consequences. Each country pledged its own climate action plan or nationally determined contribution or NDC. And now in 2025, we've exceeded the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold for a full year. Global emissions continue rising while extreme weather intensifies, yet only a handful of countries have updated their climate commitments. Current NDCs aren't just inadequate, they're failing us. I'm Mitzi Jonelle Tan, and today we're exploring why NDCs, literally the blueprints for humanity's survival, are falling short when we need them most. Brazil now stands at the center of this crisis. As host of the upcoming COP30, potentially the most crucial climate summit of our lifetime, Brazil's latest NDC carries particular significance. The question now is, does it demonstrate the leadership and ambition we desperately need? Joining me today are Sir David King, former UK Chief Scientific Advisor who helped negotiate the Paris Agreement and now chairs the Climate Crisis Advisory Group, and Tulio Andrade, Brazil's head of climate negotiations. Can Brazil's approach set a new standard? What's blocking greater ambition globally? And most importantly, can we still chart a path to climate stability? Let's find out. My first question is for you, Tulio. Brazil was one of the first to update its NDC, pledging an emissions cut of up to 67% by 2035. What drove Brazil to make one of the more ambitious NDC commitments when most countries are lagging behind?
Thank you so much, Mitzi, and it's a huge pleasure to be here with you today. For us in Brazil, the most important and transformational perhaps inflection that we had was when climate became a whole of government, whole of society, whole of economy. The Brazilian NDC was not an effort that was only led by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or the Ministry of Climate as usual, but most importantly by the Ministry of Finance, which very early on issued the ecological transformation plan, pretty much designing a whole of economic instruments that will take Brazil to the future, that we use the challenge of climate change, of transitioning to a low carbon and climate resilient economy as an opportunity. And this is not only something that is part of a narrative and storytelling. This for Brazil is something that is effectively transforming the economy, including by very concrete examples. So we have been using prototypes already to use climate to reduce the cost of capital. As part of the ecological transformation plan, Brazil also launched the Brazilian investment platform, our own country platform, which already counts with $14 billion of bankable projects. And in addition to that, we also worked on a groundbreaking project with the Inter-American Development Bank around Eco-Invest, which is a mechanism for hedging risks, which in the case of Brazil is one of the key drivers for high cost of capital. So very effectively, we have been seeing Brazil, and together with also the Brazilian Development Bank, a process in which climate ambition is effectively an opportunity, way beyond narrative. And also the Brazilian NDC was designed to present to Brazilian society community not only commitment to 2035, but way beyond that, the vision of the country to the future. So where does Brazil wants to be in 2035? So you will see in Brazilian NDC something that will balance not only climate ambition as a driver of economic and social opportunities, but also of climate justice, and as a way to regenerate the entire Brazilian society, the entire Brazilian economy, and Brazilian ecosystems, most importantly the Amazon.
Thank you so much for that answer, Tulio. Really emphasizing how we need a whole of government, whole of society, whole of economy approach to the crisis that we're seeing, and not just seeing it as a crisis, but as you said, an opportunity to regenerate the entire Brazilian society, the Brazilian economy. And hopefully this is how all world leaders approach this, and we really regenerate the entire world. Sir David, given that we've already reached 1.5 degrees Celsius last year, what would you say to the other countries that still have not submitted or updated their NDCs?
Well, I'm going to add, Mitzi, given the 1.5 has now been exceeded, this year we're actually averaging about 1.7 above the pre-industrial level. Given all of that, we need to also add in the withdrawal of President Trump from the United Nations process. And my response to this is every nation of the world that considers itself progressive on this issue must make commitments that go well beyond their commitments made in 2015. And beyond that, every nation must deliver on its commitments. We've seen already the nature of the challenge facing us. There is no moment to waste. Every country needs to put forward today, and as soon as possible, if they can't do it today, they must put forward commitments that really meet the nature of the challenge. I'm going to say, in the light of the Trump withdrawal, that the rest of the world needs to act quickly and give an example to each other by acting quickly. Let me first of all then commend Brazil for its commitment to reduce emissions by 67% by 2035. This is a serious and good commitment. And I really congratulate the Brazilian government on making this commitment. And I believe the government is serious in its intention to deliver, and to deliver a good meeting when it comes to November, December this year. I think I do want to say the British government has also made its commitment, and our commitment is 81% reduction by 2035. And that was a speech that our Prime Minister made in Baku, and it is a commitment that we believe we will deliver on. Why 81% and not 80%? That's because that's the figure that has come up through a big committee sitting in Parliament that has thought it through in detail how we can deliver that. Many people are saying the third world, the developing countries of the world, can't join in. I have recently been in Africa saying to African countries, lead the way. Don't wait for countries like the United States to come forward. This is your opportunity to jump into the future. And when I say this, it's based on the fact that making this transition in advance of your economy growing rapidly is a big advantage. You don't have to then switch off the fossil fuel sources that are producing your electricity. You move straight on to wind and solar. And in Africa, this is in abundance. In South America, in abundance too. So what we need to do is play up to our natural resources and use them. What is the cheapest form of electricity in Britain today? It's renewables. And it's not just renewables. It's a source of renewable energy that many people, myself included, were really doubtful would be competitive in pricing. That's offshore wind. Offshore wind is our cheapest form of electricity production because offshore wind turbines are much bigger than onshore, and also because they're producing regular electricity. The wind blows in the North Sea very regularly. Each country needs to look at its own advantages. This is not a well-known fact. Kenya in Africa is now producing 90% of its electricity from renewables, 90% already. Now that is just switching over to using the fact that in Kenya, geothermal energy is widely available. It's not just Kenya. They're playing this out for East Africa. So what we're looking at is a major transition that is not costing Kenya money, it's saving Kenya money. So I want to say Every country needs to look at its own capabilities in moving forward on this agenda and examine them carefully and seeing how far you can stretch. Because as you stretch, it's going to be good for your economy. It's going to be good going forward. Now, some countries are very heavily reliant on coal, not least China, not least South Africa in Africa. And I've recently been to South Africa and talking to them there. They need to understand that building renewable energy sources for electricity on their grid should be done right away. They can deal with the transition of coal miners away from coal mining into other jobs more slowly. But if they added 20 gigawatts of electricity onto the grid in the next few months, this would massively improve their economic growth going forward in time. Their coal mining and their coal energy sources are out of date, right? They require a vast amount of money to keep them running. So what we're looking at is opportunities that are presented by this agenda. Of course, on the other side of the opportunities are the risks associated with us not delivering on this. Where we are today, we have something like half a trillion dollars of loss and damage occurring around the world. In Brazil, they experienced this terrible flooding event in South Brazil, which was a massive event, the biggest city in southern Brazil going underwater. But this is happening around the world. When I was in South Africa, in KwaZulu-Natal, they had the same thing. That fire in Los Angeles, we all know about it because this is in the developed world. That fire, loss and damage, was in excess of $100 billion. And not all of that is insured. And you can be sure that the insurance companies will not be insuring for rebuild in those areas. So what we are looking at is a disastrous situation today, and that can only get worse going forward in time. That's the message for this, Mitzi, you're right, critically important COP meeting in Brazil this year. The future of humanity on the planet depends on us getting this right. I'm just delighted to meet up with Tulio, and I'm very much looking forward to working with you, Tulio, going forward into the Brazil meeting to see that we get what we can out of it.
Thank you, Sir Dave, especially about your emphasis on how the rest of the world needs to act quickly, that despite what's happening with the US, we need to keep going because the climate crisis keeps going. And I really appreciate the emphasis on how the Global South is actually already leading the way as well and having that reframe. And we're seeing a lot of Global South countries committing to the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, committing to phasing out fossil fuels, and like Brazil, ensuring that we actually have high targets that are doable and won't leave the people behind. And so when we talk about the energy transition, we also need to make sure that no one is left behind in the process. So Tulio, I wanted to ask how Brazil's NDC emphasizes forest restoration and renewable energy. So my question for you is, how will Brazil make sure that these environmental goals also deliver socioeconomic benefits for vulnerable communities affected by these transitions?
Thank you very much, Mitzi. And just coming back to a very important message that Sir David mentioned, which is this opportunity of countries to jump into the future. We are seeing a very exponential era. We are under an exponential changing reality, including in terms of the climate, but also exponentiality in terms of solutions. And this is at the very core of this combination between the renewables energy revolution and also the need for forest restorations, because we see in Brazil three inevitable transitions that will allow countries and humanity as a whole to jump into the future and perhaps will define our future. The first one is the climate transition. There is no choice. Either we anticipate what is to come, and either we equip our societies, our communities with resilience, but also in terms of tapping into the opportunities of a low carbon transition, or we are going to be lagging behind and to the detriment of communities and economies. So this climate transition is the first. The second is the digital transition. And the third is the biotechnology transition. And they're all happening at the same time. And in Brazil, we have designed our NDC to also build on different processes in which we learn how to combine the climate transition with the digital transition, with the biotechnology transition, including in terms of the bioeconomy, which was a very strong agenda that Brazilian G20 last year launched, including in terms of principles for bioeconomy. Bioeconomy has a very important role, not only in terms of the energy transition, but most importantly in terms of forest restoration. And one of the key principles of bioeconomy is to create value locally so that communities on the ground will gain from this transition. But another also transformation in terms of mindset that is happening in the Brazilian society is that we are finally coming to terms with an intellectual humility to understand that the Brazilian indigenous peoples, they carry knowledge, transitional knowledge and wisdom that will be invaluable to everything that we do to our society and to the planet as a whole. And part of that was the letter that was issued by the COP president designate, inviting the world to join a global mutirão, which is a social technology that we have in Brazil that comes from indigenous peoples. So the combination, the entire agenda that comes from renewables and forest restoration is one in which we are combining not only innovation, which comes from biotechnology and digital technologies, for example, in terms of smart grids and etc., but also traditional knowledges from that we are learning and incorporating from traditional communities, quilombolas in Brazil, Afro-descendant communities, but also indigenous communities. And this is a way in which we can not only combine solutions that will create tipping points that are positive in terms of exponentiality of solutions, but also allow for the value that is created to benefit communities. So now in Brazil, we have solar and wind gaining a lot of space in the Brazilian electricity mix, which already counts with 90% of renewables. And a lot of that, as opposed to traditional modes of energy, comes from distributed sources of energy in which individuals are also contributing to the grid. That's a completely new revolution. In terms of forest restoration, we also recognize that those that knows the forest and forest restoration is an agenda in which not only that perhaps is the best example of the synergy between climate and biodiversity. Forest restoration only works when there is a very, very sophisticated combination of complexity in terms of diversity of different species. Otherwise, it will not work. And those that know the best the ecosystem are those communities that understand the Amazon, for example. So we are fast coming to a position in which climate justice is not only a moral, which is extremely important, and ethical imperative, but also a driver for efficiency, for for sustainable results in the longer term. And this is also something that was symbolized by the fact that for the first time, we also have a Ministry of Indigenous Peoples, which brought the indigenous peoples to the very core of the Brazilian federal decision-making.
Thank you, Tulio. Having a Ministry of Indigenous Peoples is such a crucial yet surprisingly it's only happening now, like you would expect that more and more countries will be having this too, and we hope that other countries follow the lead of Brazil and also have this and ensure that we have our indigenous peoples, those with local knowledge and traditional knowledge, to really help us go back to our relationship to the earth. And something that a lot of these indigenous communities and a lot of marginalized groups across the world are calling for is making sure that the just transition, especially for the global south and for marginalized communities, is funded and financed. And Sir David, you were already mentioning earlier about how it is expensive. There's a lot of loss and damage. There's a lot of money that's needed for the just transition. So what do you think are the concrete steps that wealthy nations need to take to close the climate finance gap?
So I think the first thing I've got to say is closing the finance gap requires the northern countries, often called the northern countries, the developed countries, to contribute. Now, they're talking about contributing since many, many years ago. The promise of $100 billion a year never materialized. That promise got buried into public and private money, and the private money was all investment. That is not what was originally under discussion. It was public money ready to deal with loss and damage in other countries, to deal with the helping them make this transition we're talking about. Right now, we need considerably more than that. We need funds which are rising up to $500 billion a year in order to manage this situation. But I'm just going to come back to much of what Tulio said, and these were very wise words. What we need to understand is reversing our position on the indigenous people of the world. The colonialists, and of course many of them white colonialists, so I should see myself as a guilty partner here, were really guilty in trying to wipe the indigenous people off the face of the earth. That was the operation that was conducted, whether we look at Southern Africa, South Africa, the country of my birth, where the indigenous people of the Kalahari Desert were considered to be sub-people. Not to be given the same quality of life expectation as we would give ourselves. And so we need to look at this. The indigenous people of the world have shown us how to live with the natural world. We are part of that natural world. Our ecosystems that we are currently in the process of destroying are critical to our well-being. And we have to develop a system that understands managing human well-being means also managing ecosystem well-being. And the group of people in the world who understand that better than any others are the indigenous people, whether we're talking about Australia, the Kalahari Desert, or the people living on ice up in the North Pole region. Right, the Inuit and Sami people who've lived there for thousands of years. These people fully respect the natural world. Now, we need to not only give them credit for doing this, we need to learn from them. So it's a major step forward. I just want to say this is all very challenging because it challenges the way we've been living over hundreds of years. And I do understand the transition is in some difficulty now because many people, and obviously President Trump is a leader of these, are saying that is the wrong way to go. We must simply look at human well-being. There's no understanding in that approach as to where our well-being lies. We are currently destroying the future of the world for humanity, but also the future of the world for other living creatures. And what sort of a world would that be? So I think everything that we need to do now is talking amongst each other about the importance of this real qualitative change in the way we work in our societies. And I can say there's no society that has completely got clean hands on this issue. We need to empower ourselves to make these transitions that are needed. We need to work towards a system that acknowledges that the only sort of civilization that will survive is an ecosystem-based civilization. Now, if we can get that understanding through, then everything else more or less flows. It needs to be understood that the peaceful transition that I'm talking about doesn't allow for people to have disagreements and wars. This is a situation where, frankly, humanity can no longer afford these wars. The wars themselves are driving us into this extinction. So these sound like dramatic words I'm using here, but I do believe that humanity's future is now at stake. That's how serious it is. And unless we understand this and create a system in which we recognize the importance not only of human well-being, but also the importance of our ecosystems. Brazil stands at the frontier of that. You still have ecosystems that are invaluable in Brazil. Many South American countries are in that position too. I would say, unfortunately, Europe lost its position in terms of the ecosystems. We managed to deforest much of Europe over the last few thousand years. What we need to understand, let's move to Africa. In Africa, there is an enormous ecosystem as well. The forests of the Congo region are still enormous, under threat. They are under threat precisely because minerals are being discovered in that part of the world. Now, we need to really see, how do we help the Congo region to move forward, maintaining its precious forests and the systems within those forests, and at the same time deliver what we need. And I'm not going to suggest we don't. We need minerals. We know that it's not only renewables that is needed, we also need storage systems. We need large-scale batteries. And these, I'm afraid, demand more and more minerals. So all of this needs to be put together in a sane way. We don't just go in, remove the forest and remove the minerals and then get out. That's not the way to go.
Thank you, Sir Dave. And I 100% agree with everything that you said. We need to ensure that when we're transitioning into a new energy system, we're not replicating the same colonialist, extractivist methods that we've been doing with fossil fuels, because then we'll just be hit with the biodiversity crisis. And that's a much larger crisis that also encompasses the climate crisis. And I really appreciate how you pointed out how it was during the colonizers' time when the colonizers were taking resources from the global south, from the colonized countries, and that is what allowed these developed or wealthy nations to develop and get wealthy. And that's why the emissions started to rise, because of that imbalance of resources being taken out from our lands. And it's such a crucial thing to remember. And one way to really ensure that we put that back in balance is for the global north really to pay back its debt, because it in a way borrowed or took money from the global south, from resources. And that's why the climate finance question now is so crucial, because it is in a way a form of reparations as well, to make sure that the money comes in the form of grants and not in loans. And so, Tulio, my question for you is, how is Brazil navigating the challenge of funding its ambitious NDC amid global economic uncertainty?
Thank you so much, Mitzi. And I believe that a lot of the opportunities that Brazil is seeing in the climate space comes from the fact that because Brazil is a big country, it's a country that has strong institutions. We are able to use the climate agenda and the climate ambition to attract investments by building prototypes, like I mentioned, such as Eco-Invest, to reduce the cost of capital. But this is not a privilege that most developing countries have. Most developing countries will not be able to overcome constraints in terms of fiscal space that Brazil also has. We are in a context in which debt, the volumes of debt is a concern not only in the developing world, but also in the developed world. But this kind of fiscal space, and most importantly, the compounding crisis for vulnerable countries that have already very limited fiscal space, dealing with different crises, multiple crises, including climate, can be devastating. And going back to the discussion that is extremely important about the structures and the legacy of colonialism and the legacy of imperialism. If we are to address climate change, we need to address the root causes that led us to this, and to really the structural causes of climate change, including in terms of where finance is flowing. Finance is flowing now, most importantly, from to fossil fuel-based activities that in the past have been the most profitable ones. The rules that we have for assessing risks and investment opportunities, they do not take into account that the future will be exponentially different than the past. They're all based on past assessment, and a past that is completely obsolete, that it's not coming back. So the rules now that guide credit rating agencies, for example, they take into account a past that is not relevant for what is to come. This needs to change. Also, we need to change the dynamic of flows in which the climate finance, including, is one in which developing countries, they receive perhaps millions in climate finance, and they have to pay back billions in interests. This creates a perverse dynamic in which the financial flows are going from developing to developed countries. And if we are to really address climate change, it's high time that we addressed the structural causes of all of these imbalances. And I believe that the IPCC also framed the challenge of finance very well in terms of the stocks and flows of climate finance, and the need for us to increase the stocks and flows to low carbon and climate resilient activities, but most importantly, to increase stock inflows to developing countries as well. If we do not do this, we are not going to have a common future. And I believe that very much back to Sir David's point, we have to understand not only that we are not separate from nature, we are part of nature, and most importantly and most basically, we are interdependent. So the prosperity of other countries is also the prosperity of our own communities. We are not going to have a future if this future is not one that is shared, that in which prosperity is shared, and one of climate justice. So perhaps the message way beyond the notion of climate finance mobilization is the importance for us to address these structural causes, and addressing that will also make us accelerate the implementation of the Paris Agreement, including in terms of NDCs that will align the world to the 1.5.
Thank you, Tulio, and thank you, Sir Dave. Really, we are interdependent, and it's funny to me that what you were saying earlier, Sir Dave, that climate deniers and those who want to turn away from the climate crisis say, let's just think about human well-being, as if human well-being isn't caring for nature, caring for the climate, caring for each other, and really understanding that our liberation, our well-being are all tied to each other, and we are in this together, and there's only literally one planet that we are all on, and everything that we have ever loved, ever done, ever will do is on this planet. And so that's why we need to protect it, because it is our home. And so we need climate finance. We need a just transition out of fossil fuels. We need to ensure ecosystem balance. We need to return to our relationship with nature. We need to ensure that marginalized indigenous communities are leading the way, and that global south communities are able to lead the energy transition. That's a lot of need tos and things to do. And now we've been talking about the COP30 a bunch of times already. My question, Tulio, since COP30 also marks 10 years since Paris, how is Brazil planning to use the summit to demand stronger global action? And Sir Dave, what would scientific success look like at COP30?
Thank you very much, Mitzi. This is an extremely important question, and I think that there are three main goals that we are having for COP30. To accelerate the implementation of the Paris Agreement. The very first one is that COP30 will be the first in which, following up COP29, the completion of the Paris Rulebook, the conclusion also of the very last negotiating mandate that came from COP21, the one around the new collective quantified financial goal. We now have everything that we need in terms of international law to make the Paris Agreement move as not only a political pact, but also an international policy instrument in which NDCs are periodically presented to countries, but also biannual transparency reports under the enhanced transparency framework of the Paris Agreement, and also national adaptation plans. We have to come to fact and to take stock of the fact that roughly half of the Paris Agreement membership presented the BTRs, the biannual transparency report. So what is keeping all countries from presenting that? Also, in terms of NDCs, in terms of NAPs, what are the gaps? So this is the time that we consolidate the institutional and the legal legacy that we have already built over the past 9 years. And much more important than from COP30 to create something new in terms of the negotiations, the most important is for us to consolidate what we have achieved so far, because this is a collective legacy. And this is the most important signal and inflection that we can give to protect and to defend multilateralism. So this is the first objective. The second is that now that we are coming to this moment in which we really need to transition from negotiation to an implementation mode, we have to accelerate the implementation of the Paris Agreement by precisely attacking the structural challenges that we have, which goes way beyond the UNFCCC process. So we are talking about the MDBs, the multilateral development banks, the IMF, everything that is actually keeping the Paris Agreement from, because the Paris Agreement is very much working, but not fast enough. So how can we accelerate and make the Paris Agreement faster than the pace of global warming? And third, which is perhaps the most important, is that we have to connect the abstraction of the negotiations to people's real lives. Now that climate change is a reality and that we're seeing, climate change is everything. Climate change is inflation, Here in Brazil, for example, we have seen climate change impact the production of coffee, which led, for example, to coffee being stolen from supermarkets in the US because of the price of coffee. The same with orange, the same with cocoa. So now climate is not only an environmental issue. It has never been, always a development issue, but now it's affecting people's real lives. In addition to extreme weather events like the ones that we saw, for example, in Porto Alegre, Sir David mentioned, which really changed the mindset of Brazilians, that climate change has arrived at our doorsteps. Climate is about jobs. Climate is about education. Children here in Brazil, some classes of physical education have to be canceled because of unprecedented heat waves. So now it's becoming part of people's daily routines in health, in entertainment. And now is the time that we connect the abstraction of the process to people's real lives, not only in terms of communication, but also in ensuring progress that is commensurate to the climate crisis. How can negotiators, they have to leave their mental models of decision-making to one in which what they do needs to make people's better now and to the future. So these are the three main aspects of the vision, so to speak, to defend and protect multilateralism, to accelerate the implementation of the Paris Agreement beyond the UNFCCC, and to connect our agenda to people's lives on the ground, to the real life.
Thank you, Tulio. And Sir David, what would scientific success look like at COP30 in your opinion?
Well, thank you. I'm just going to make a quick comment about what Tulio's just been saying. I believe that we're in a different situation already, and it's a more positive situation, because as I travel around, I find there's a common voice between developing and developed countries on this issue. That has not been the case for very many years. In negotiating over the last 20 years, I was often faced with people in developing countries saying, we're not going to manage this. You guys have to reduce your emission. By you guys, meaning the developed world. That has now turned around. Here I am using Kenya as a best case example. Who would have anticipated that? So what we're doing globally is finding we're all in the same boat, and we all need to negotiate in a way that leads to implementation, just to pick up on what Tulio's saying. Now, having said that, the question of what does the science community say about where we are? We've already exceeded 1.5 degrees centigrade. Came as a big surprise to most people in the scientific community, perhaps not to Jim Hansen, the leading scientist in the United States. But the reason for this is because we're getting very big positive feedbacks now, by which I mean because of the climate driven by greenhouse gases in the atmosphere rising in temperature so rapidly, we're also seeing, for example, massive loss of ice on land. And ice on land was reflecting sunlight back into space. If you remove the ice, the ground below it soaks up the sunshine. If I take you to Greenland, a colleague of mine here at Cambridge was measuring the loss of ice from Greenland over his working life. So we go back 40 years, his estimate was 50 million tons a year of ice was being lost. And this year we're seeing the best estimate, and it's a very detailed estimate, is 30 million tons an hour is being lost from Greenland. And what that means is that we can anticipate sea level rises going up much more rapidly than they have before. All of this ice on land enters the ocean. So it's not only giving rise to faster temperature rises than we anticipated, it's also giving rise to much hotter surface ocean temperatures right around the world. The big oceans of the world are heating up much more quickly just over the last 3 or 4 years. And so The threats that we were all facing are now with us. So when I am asked about what is the scientific response to this, yes, we must reduce emissions deeply and rapidly, as deeply and rapidly as is common with human development. We're not saying we should shut off human development and just shut off power stations. That is not the message. The message is we need to move as quickly as is compatible with the management of human well-being. But then it's not enough. If I'm going to say, if we were to reduce emissions over the next few months to net zero, we wouldn't be much better off because of what I've just been saying about the loss of ice, which is happening at the North Pole, the South Pole, it's happening in the Himalayas, it's happening around the world. Once that begins and exposes the absorption of sunlight, this is a massive effect. It is almost irreversible without human intervention. So when I say without human intervention, we're looking at how can scientists and engineers come up with methodologies that allow us to recool the North Pole region, recool the ice around the South Pole region, around Antarctica. In 2023, Antarctica lost half of its sea ice. That's the ice in the sea around Antarctica protecting the ice on land. Half of it gone in 1 year. So what we're looking at is, are there methods we can use to recool these areas so that we can recover the reflectivity of ice in those areas during the polar summer months? So the third, what we've got to do is reduce emissions. Secondly, remove excess greenhouse gases. If anyone believes there's still an ability to go on emitting, then forget it. We are already far too much in the way of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere today. Just to put numbers on it, 427 is the amount of carbon dioxide. Add in methane, and we're well over 500. It's more like 530 parts per million. The pre-industrial level, 275. So we've almost doubled the absorption of heat by our atmosphere through our emissions to date. Any further emissions, we've got to remember we will have to remove them, and probably at great expense, in order to create a manageable future for humanity. The message is not very good. If I take you to the country of Vietnam, why Vietnam? Vietnam is a country that was created entirely by a river, the Mekong River, flowing down through East Asia for many, many years, carrying silt, created the country of Vietnam. So the country is a very flat country. It's the third biggest rice producer in the world as a result of this. And in the Mekong Delta, you have the biggest rice paddy fields in the world. Third biggest rice producer in the world. We're now estimating that in 25 years' time, Vietnam, 85% of the landmass of Vietnam will be under seawater at least once a year. You think of that, going under seawater means it's no longer producing rice. Can it sustain 100 million people plus on that landmass in that time? These are the kind of situations we're faced with. It's rice production. What are we doing to feeding the ability to feed the people on the planet? So there are very real challenges there, and we are therefore forced to going into repairing the climate systems wherever we can manage it, and that's what many scientists are now trying to work on. I'm going to also mention something we haven't mentioned already, which is resilience or adaptation. Every region of the world is suffering from extreme weather events because the weather is in transition around the whole world as a result of what is happening. And as the weather is in transition, we can, with some certainty, predict for each region of the world what the weather is going to look like over the coming decades. And when I say each region, I mean for each city. I mean for each town, for each region. We can predict at a remarkably small scale, we can predict what the weather changes will be. And every country, every region, every city mayor needs to be using this as a means of building resilience to the challenges that lie ahead of us. So there's the big program that the scientific community can contribute to. We're no longer in a situation where simply reducing emissions is enough. Of course, it's essential. We're all cooked if we don't do that. But even if we do that, we've got these other pieces of the puzzle to deal with. These things have not previously been discussed in the COP meetings, and I'm very much hoping that Brazil will provide us with an avenue for bringing this discussion into the open.
Thank you, Sir Dave, for really bringing that forward. Adaptation is so crucial, especially for countries in the global south that are already being affected by the climate crisis, but not just in the south, because as you said, all over the world, the effects are already here, and we need to catch up, and we need to ensure that we keep the majority of people, the people who are most vulnerable, safe. And thank you both so much for the valuable insights. We are in a crisis, but we have to remember that in that crisis, there is an opportunity to truly address the roots of the climate crisis and transform society into one that remembers that we are part of nature, we are interdependent, and we are one ecosystem. We'll all be closely monitoring NDC submissions ahead of COP30 and hoping that this summit will put humanity back on a safer path. COP30 will be crucial, and we need civil society support to ensure that the goals have been laid out today. So everyone watching this, please make sure to like, comment, and share, because we need this video to reach a wider audience to ensure that the goals that we've laid out here today actually happen. For those watching at home, if you also want to learn more about how Brazil and other countries are approaching their NDCs, head to CCAG's website to read their latest report from Pledges to Promises, ensuring NDCs deliver on climate action. We'll put the link in the description. Until next time, bye!
Bye-bye.